Hi, I'm Nathan, and you're listening to the Queer Conscious Podcast. One of the biggest questions that I wanted to answer with this podcast was how to keep our hearts open. It is way too easy, especially for the LGBTQ community, to close ourselves off from love because the risk of losing it all is real. And we've all experienced grief or heartbreak in some way. One moment we're fine, the next moment a song, a smell, or even a grocery aisle can take us out. And today's episode is a powerful one. We're joined by Jim Laveck. He's the author of Life After Losses. He went on to write 2 other books to help people navigate grief, heartache, and loss. And Jim's not just writing about grief in theory, he has lived it. By the age of 47, he had not lost one husband, he had lost 2. Oddly enough, they were both named Bob. And in this conversation, Jim shares the heartache, the healing, and the hope he found along the way. And we talk about what grief actually looks like and how it's not so linear, and the importance of being gentle with yourself as you experience the multitude of emotions that come from something like this. So whether you're actually grieving someone, whether you're just trying to navigate the dating scene and keep your heart open, I hope that this episode serves as a reminder to anyone listening the importance of keeping your heart open and to never give up an opportunity to love and be loved in return. Hi, Jim. How are you doing?
I'm good, Nathan. How you doing?
Good. Thank you for joining me today. I just really appreciate you sharing your story. And, you've experienced loss on quite an intense level that most people probably won't experience ever.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
I can't imagine what you've gone through to get to a place where you can share what you've learned and help others with that. But this idea of life after loss, how did that come to you?
Well, somewhere around late 2019, I started feeling like I needed to tell my story. Having been widowed twice before I was 47 years old, or by the time I was 47, it felt like I needed to do something. I needed to tell the story because I was seeing a lot of other people suffering and going through grief. And in some of the online groups that I participate in, I kept seeing a lot of the same kind of questions, same kind of stories. And I thought I had a different perspective. And once the pandemic hit, I was like, well, I'm not going anywhere. So I have plenty of time now. I can finish this off. And so I finished writing it and sent that out. The writing was more of a cathartic practice for me, just a long form type of journaling. And in doing so, I discovered a few things about myself and about these men that I loved and these events that I had to live through.
Yeah. And you mentioned in the book that journaling was a big part of your process. Was writing this book also part of that healing process for you?
Well, I did a lot of journaling after the first loss. I didn't do very much after the second one. I was busy raising children and being a parent and working full time.
I was going to say, you being a parent is just another extraordinary part of your journey and managing the grief along with raising 2 children. Why don't we just start with the beginning? How did you meet Bob in the first place?
The first Bob.
Yeah.
So I was living with my sister. We had an apartment in Goleta or Santa Barbara. It was one of the two at that point. I think it was Santa Barbara. And she was dating a guy and she got pregnant and they wanted to get married. And so I'm like, well, I don't want to live with a baby. So I'm going to go look for a place where I could be myself, my authentic gay self, without judgment or anything like that. So back then we had a community center, a gay and lesbian community center, and the G was the first letter back then. So I went to the community center. There was a bulletin board for somebody looking for a roommate to share in a 3-bedroom house. And there was another roommate there. So I went to the house, immediately captivated by his eyes, but I was not looking for anything. I was simply looking for a room to rent.
Sure, you were.
I was, and this was like in a February or March timeframe. And I applied and I got the I got the position. I got the room to rent, right? So, and we lived together as roommates for several months. And then one day, our roommate said to him, "Do you realize you guys flirt a lot? Is there something there?" He asked me out to the backyard to have that conversation. He's like, "Is there something going on here?" And yeah, there was something going on. And then we decided that we would give a relationship a try.
And you did.
We did. 7 years.
You just like move in with someone and then like, hey, it turns out we're interested in each other.
Yeah. It was a surprise for me because, I was, what was I, 21, I think, when I moved in. So still a baby, still new.
Yeah. And you weren't out of the closet yet at this point, right? When you guys first met.
Well, I was socially, with my friends, but not so much, I think, with my family. No, my mom knew. Yeah, my family knew, but other people didn't.
Okay. So, because what was the story about the yard sale? There was like a secret you were trying to keep or something, or what was this?
Trying to keep a secret. So my mom, to this day, loves going to yard sales. And so she was visiting me in Santa Barbara. I think she was going to do something with one of the doctors down there. And so she was staying with us, and we still had the 2 separate bedrooms at that point, so she got to sleep in one of the extra bedrooms. So we went to yard sales, and Bob was a landscaper. And so he's always getting garden tools. And we went to this one place, and there was a shovel that he wanted, and it was like $5 or whatever. And he's like, I really could use that shovel, but I don't have any money. And I was like, I got $5. So no worries. And my mom just, you boys can just take it out and trade. And so we glanced at each other and we're like, does she know? Because we hadn't really announced or shared with anybody that we were exploring a relationship.
Yeah. And so Jim, you have to tell us, did you take it out and trade?
7 years. That's probably the most expensive shovel he ever bought.
Oh my gosh. That's hilarious. So you have this relationship, 7 years, you were roommates, and then how far into it did you two get married?
Well, quote unquote married, yeah. We actually had a priest perform a commitment ceremony while he was on his deathbed. So it was 7 years before we did that. And, this was the early 90s. It just didn't seem to be a thing for us to have to do a commitment ceremony or anything big. But that's where it was. So it was like a week or so before he died. I don't even remember the exact date.
What can you tell us about what was happening leading up to this moment?
Well, it was, it was February, I believe, February or March. His father had just passed away not too long before that. And he noticed a lump on his thigh. Didn't think anything of it, but we went and got it checked, and turns out it was a lymphoma. And so they did other blood tests, and they found out that they determined he was HIV positive and that this was really AIDS. You can imagine at that point how scared both of us were. We had always used protection together. I wasn't, entirely sure of his activities before me, but I knew that with me it was always safe. But again, we were scared for me as well. So getting that test and waiting back then, it was 2 weeks or so before you could get a result. That was a very stressful 2 weeks. Very frightening 2 weeks. And so there was a lot of conversation about what we meant to each other between that and his death. We spent a lot of time in hospitals. I slept in the bed next to him on many nights. To this day, I abhor hospitals. The staff, though, at the hospital were absolutely amazing. They made me feel as important as they made him feel. Again, back then it was kind of unheard of to have those kind of relationships on display in public.
Yeah. Right. I was going to say, especially at that time and with the stigma around HIV and AIDS, well, I would imagine that you might experience some challenges, but it doesn't sound like you experienced that in the hospital, at least.
Not with the majority of the healthcare providers. I will say that at the last time that we went to the hospital, and they said, "Okay, well, you're just going to have to call hospice." And well, what are you talking about? There was one doctor who said, "Well, didn't anybody tell you it's terminal?" And he gave me such an attitude like that, and it just angers me. There could have been some more compassion around that, right?
Yeah. Especially when you're trying to care for your husband and watching him get progressively worse.
Giving him his medication, giving him shots, helping him go to the bathroom, all that stuff. And then even when he was at home, we put a hospital bed in the downstairs in the living room, and I brought a day bed down there to sleep next to him. And when he needed to get up, go to the restroom, he'd get up and hold on to me, and we'd wobble, and I would make a comment several times, we're just going to dance over to the bathroom. So it was a jumble of activities, of things that we were doing, making sure that he was eating healthy, and that his pain was managed and his nausea was managed when they were giving him chemo and all this stuff.
Yeah. And as chaotic as it was, reading jokes that he would make around the hospital, it sounded like he kept quite a positive attitude.
He was the kind of person that people were just naturally drawn to. He had a smile and a twinkle in his eye that just drew people to him. He always went out of his way to make people feel comfortable. And I don't even think he was really going out of his way. I think it was just a natural part of who he was, to put other people at ease.
The part that stuck out to me was when they said, "Oh, you're back again." He's like, "Well, I love the 5-star dining and the great accommodations."
Yeah.
Yeah.
He trying to make the best out of the worst.
Which is really the worst. Like, yeah, you're facing the end of life here, and this deathbed that you're down there with him. You mentioned you're having lots of intimate conversations, forgiving each other. You even got married there in that bed. What can you share with us about those intimate conversations?
There were a lot of tears. And it's been almost 30 years, 29 years exactly, but and so some of the specifics at this point are gone. I do remember the feelings. I remember the tears. It's just, when you're in a relationship, you do stupid things to piss the other person off sometimes. You push buttons. Same thing with siblings, right?
Never. What?
It's like, yeah. Well, I don't know, whoever's in a relationship, if you understand what I'm saying. It's just, the other person will do something that just digs under your skin. You just want to dig back a little bit. It doesn't mean that anything that you hate them or anything like that. It's just, you do stupid things. You say stupid things. Sometimes you have to verbalize the request for forgiveness. If I've ever done anything to make you feel less than, I want you to know that I'm sorry. It was never my intent to make you less than, because you are always more than. It was those kinds of conversation. I want you to find somebody and be happy again after I'm gone. Well, let me worry about that. I'll be fine. Let's worry about making sure that you're okay right now. You're comfortable, and there was a lot more focus on the other person as opposed to ourselves. And I think even if you're in a relationship, most people do tend to think about themselves frequently. And it's through that selfless, now I'm taking care of somebody. Now I'm a caregiver, and he's concerned about what I'm going to be. I heard from one of the counselors that he had seen while I wasn't there, about how concerned he was about what was going to happen to me, because he had accepted that it was going to happen. That was right around the time that they came up with the single cocktail kind of medication, but I guess it was too late. But with the cancer, the lymphoma, and the chemo knocking out his immune system even more. There really wasn't much hope, but we tried.
I imagine those conversations really had an impact to just clear out any of the old resentments and stuff. Would you say that impacted your grief process to be able to have that time with them?
I can only compare that to the second loss, where I didn't have that opportunity. I think both were difficult to work through. Even though we knew it was coming and we knew we could clear the air of anything, I don't know that it made it easier. I almost want to think that it made it harder. And this is something I hadn't really thought about, because we had reached that level of emotional intimacy, that losing that then may have been even made it harder for me to say goodbye.
Wow. So you get to this point where you're caring for someone for months. You're having these intimate discussions. You're forgiving each other and seeing each other as more than, and being really selfless in the process. So yeah, I could see how losing him after that would almost make that even harder of a loss.
I think that's something I need to maybe work through. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah. Well, which now brings me to this quote from Garth Brooks, which I was bawling like a baby. I even played the song and I was like, I have to hear this. The quote that sticks out is, "I could have missed the pain, but I'd have had to miss the dance." Right. And I'm curious what stuck out to you about this song.
Just gotta chill. To me, that song, that lyric is about the joy of having what I had, and that made the pain worth it. You know, it's that better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. But the way that song was presented, and the music behind it, and just everything about that song itself, was really emotional. And I knew that I needed to have that song played at his memorial. And so there's a whole part in the book about, he grew up Catholic. So he called himself a CD Catholic, Christmas and Easter. And he wanted to have a Catholic mass, but they wouldn't allow non-liturgical music to be played. And I had talked to him about that. We talked about what his service would look like. We talked about his obituary. I wrote that with him. And I said, I really need this song to be played, because I want people to understand that even as painful as this is, knowing you is worth it. And so he agreed to let me move the service to a different place so that I could have that song played.
Another selfless thing that you're both doing for each other.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. And, you know, I think at that part of the book, you're also talking about the service being a celebration of his life. I think I don't know if it was your mom or your mother-in-law said.
It was my friend Sally. I had met her and her husband at the cancer support group. And her husband had passed away shortly before Bob did. And I'd called her to say, you know, he's coming home to die. And she had told me that her husband had just passed away. And she said that she was going to have a celebration of his life, because his death was only one day. And he lived a full life. 57 years. Oh, gosh. That's my age. Sorry, I just digressed there for a second. And so I really thought that was a beautiful sentiment. You know, I was 28 at the time that he died. I had no clue about life. I was pretty much a baby myself at that point. And so when she mentioned that, my thoughts were immediately, yes, we need to celebrate who you were, or who you are. That's what the plan was to celebrate the life that he had, the 35 years, not just that one day.
Wow. So you celebrated his life. How long was it until you were ready to date again or even able to look at men in that way again?
It was about 2 years. I had a very vivid dream, which I consider to be more of a visitation, where Bob One came to me and he didn't say the words, but I felt the emotion behind it that it was time to move on. And after that, I actually felt lighter. And that's about the time that I started thinking about possibly dating again.
And so the feeling of grief was created a lightness there for you.
It was literally, it felt like an overnight kind of thing where that weight kind of felt like it dropped. It felt really weird because I had been so deep in my grief and so single-minded in letting my grief basically run my life. I'd go to work, I'd come home, I'd drink to excess, I would smoke to excess, I would do everything to excess, hoping that, I'd shorten my lifespan because I couldn't face doing it myself. That moment came, it really did feel like a relief. That it was okay for me to grieve and carry that memory forward and move on my life.
And so you did. You met Bob too. And what can you share about your story with Bob, second Bob?
I did kiss a couple of frogs in between, but I'd hit a point in my life where I felt the only thing that would help would be a massive change. So I quit my job, I started consulting and moved on to another job, which required me to travel a lot. One of the places I went to was Memphis. I was supposed to be there for 6 months working on a project. And they put me up in an apartment and I got online on AOL. And, for those of you without Wi-Fi, we had to do the dial-up modem back then.
I remember this.
Some of your listeners might not. But, we'd get that. And you got mail. So I went to the Memphis chat room and said, hey, I'm new in town. I'm going to be working here for 6 months. Can anybody show me the lay of the land? And he responded and said, well, I was about to go to church, but sure, I could do that. And, after I met him, I realized he was probably lying about the church thing. No, I don't think he was. So he came by the apartment. He drove me around Memphis and kind of showed me where things were. Because whenever I go someplace, I like to kind of get a lay of the land of where things are. So I have some idea of where I am. And at the end of that tour, he's like, you're a really nice guy. Would you mind going out on a date? And so I was living in California and working in Memphis. So I was traveling back and forth. I said, sure. And that Wednesday, we went out for pizza. I have no idea where it was or anything. And but 2 days later, he moved in or whatever. I don't know. It wasn't that fast, but it was pretty fast.
Wait, so you had already felt this relief and this lightness of your first Bob really just saying, go ahead, that's
right.
Okay. You'd already felt that. And so when he asked you out, was there any second guessing? Was it just like, okay, let's go? Like, what was that like?
Well, there wasn't a lot of second guessing with that one. Because I had dated a couple of guys before that, for like a month or so. I felt comfortable to go out on a date. It's one date, it's dinner. I didn't expect that to grow into anything.
But it did.
I'm a 28, or at that point I was a 30-year-old single guy, Memphis, and yeah, why not?
And so you and second Bob ended up moving in together, getting married.
Yeah.
And having 2 kids.
Yep, we did.
Yeah.
We adopted 2 children from the foster care system. When we got together, I said, I'm not changing my job. I love the travel. I love what I'm doing. So he was in California. I was traveling all the time. And at one point, he heard an ad on the radio in Ventura County, and they were looking for foster parents. And so I came home one day and after traveling, and he's like, I really think we want to do this. I really think I want to do this because I've got a lot of love to give. And you're gone all the time. We talked about it, and having children was something I always wanted. but I never thought I could have because I was gay. That's gay dad. I wasn't a daddy then. Great. Oh my goodness.
So you're a daddy. Now you're a daddy. It's okay. Yeah.
I'm learning to embrace my inner daddy or my outer daddy at this point.
As you should.
So yeah, we had to go through the background checks with two different government organizations because they couldn't share information between the two, and we got approved. And he actually became a mentor for other foster parents, and we recruited several other gay families to adopt through the system.
And what year is this?
Yes, 2002.
So you just met these incredible Bobs in your life. And how long were you with second Bob for?
That was 15 years.
And then his loss, that was more of a surprise to you. Is that right?
Total surprise, yes.
Yeah.
We had moved back east. And of course, as soon as we moved east, where my work was taking me, my work started taking me back to California. So I was going back and forth, and I got home at 1:30 in the morning to 2 a.m. or whatever on that Friday, January 24th, 2014. And he was snoring away in the bedroom. And I just said, I'm too tired for that. I'm just going to go in the spare room. And so I woke up the next morning. He's still snoring away. He had been dealing with pneumonia as well. And so I figured he was just knocked out from that. Took the kids to school, went to my doctor's appointment that I had scheduled that day, came home. We had house cleaners here, and he wasn't awake. So I came in and said, where is he? They said, well, he's upstairs sleeping. We didn't want to disturb him. He's still in bed, I think is what they said. But, well, it's almost noon now. That's a little unusual. So I went upstairs, and it was very evident that he had passed away. So while I was trying to see if I could resuscitate him with 911, and we lived just like a mile and a half from the nearest emergency facility, so they were here very quickly. I was trying to work on him and totally in shock. But I heard, we've seen worse, or we'll try to bring him back or something like that. I thought there was hope while they were upstairs working with them, but he had not made it. And so here I was. We were only in town for a couple of years. I didn't really know anybody because I was gone all the time working. Kids were in school. And so I had to use his phone to find a contact of somebody local for one of his friends, who immediately came over. And there were a lot of people were there for us at that time. Kids came home, and that was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, is tell them that he was dead. Calling his mother and telling her was also very difficult. And I just remember the outpouring of support that we got from the community. It was basically somebody left a cooler on our front porch, and every night it was filled with dinner from somebody in the community. They signed up, and they had some sign-up sheet. I literally don't think I cooked for over 2 months. Somebody was bringing something every day, and they would put it in the cooler so that they wouldn't disturb us. But we would know it was there. And that kind of thing that blew me away, because I don't remember having that kind of support the first time. I mean, I had neighbors at the first time that were very helpful, but that kind of thing where somebody would deliver food and just check on you, and I didn't seem to have that the first time. And I'm not sure if it's because I was pushing people away, which I know I did. I was too deep in my own grief to worry about other people. But now I had 2 kids that I had to focus on.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you, how did having kids change your grief process from the first time?
Well, I couldn't drink myself into a stupor.
Darn it.
I know. I couldn't. I had to model appropriate grieving behavior, right? It's okay to cry in public. It's okay to cry in front of your kids. It's okay to show an emotion. It's okay to be angry at him or anybody else. So I had to be able to display that to them, that it was okay for those feelings that I knew that they were having that they couldn't quite verbalize.
It's almost like you had to set yourself a different standard in your grief. I mean, probably because you had already experienced it once, but two, now you're modeling it for two children.
Well, and that's where in writing the book, I found some gratitude because I didn't realize it at the time. That was while I was writing the book and everything was coming to me and I had a perspective of a couple of years. I needed the first loss to prepare me for the second one. So that I knew what I should do and what I shouldn't do. Because I couldn't have done it the same way the second time with kids. And I needed that second loss to put that first one in perspective. And it took me 25 years to get to that point where I felt that.
I was just going to ask, how long did it take to get to that point of gratitude? Because we often hear people say these cliches, everything happens for a reason. There's always something there to be thankful for. You're already making the face.
I'm not sure there's a reason for stuff. And if there is a reason, I'm not sure I'll ever know it in my lifetime, but this is the reason. This is what I have ascribed to that as my reason. I know that if I did not have the first one, I can't help but think that I would behave differently the second time. Right? Or because that would have been my first. Anyway, so it's a lot of the what ifs, and I don't like living in what if land because, parallel universes in the movies confuse me.
Same. I can't do too much of that.
So if I think about the what ifs in my own life, I would go crazy.
Yeah. Well, it sounds way more empowering that you are choosing the meaning to ascribe to it, like in you're choosing that gratitude, and powerful that you allowed yourself the 25 years to just be in your process around it as well. I imagine you're still in your process.
Oh, every day I'm in my process. I'm doing something, it's either I'm working on the blog or I'm working on social media posts. Every day I'm learning something and every day I'm trying to teach something. That to me is what keeps me going. That's why I still do my job after however many years I've been doing it. 14 years, I think.
Every day you learn something, every day you teach something.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And I absolutely believe that there's something, and if everybody can teach everybody.
And what advice would you give to someone who is struggling in their own grief? I know you wrote a whole book about it, so please give us the name of that as well. But what advice would you give to them?
It's called Grief Recovery for Adults. So there's actually 3 books. So there's the Life After Losses memoir, which is all about me and all about what I went through. And then I have a second one called Moving Past Grief, which is kind of a collection of stories and strategies. Still a lot about me, but it's more in terms of strategies on things to deal with. And then this Grief Recovery for Adults, the new one, it's very much less about me, and it's more about finding ways for each individual to work through their grief. And within that book, I introduced what I call a purpose framework. So there's 7 pillars to this purpose framework that starts with perceive reality. We have to accept where we are. We got to understand where we are before we can move on. And we have to get to the point where you have a realistic view of what's happening. It's very easy when you're in the middle of grief to live in denial.
And I imagine that denial might feel really appealing to people to just try and fight it.
It is. I did that, but it can't be a destination. If you're in denial, you can't address moving forward. To me, the first thing that you need to do is accept the reality of what's there.
You described a lot of emotions that you can feel around grief, within grief, as part of grief, but you described an anger towards the world and towards your partner. You described survivor's guilt. You described a numbness, and you described this depression that you had never felt before. And I'm curious, what emotion did you feel like was the hardest to deal with?
Well, I would say that the depression actually led to more despair. Those were the very dark moments where I would drink myself to sleep. I would work myself to exhaustion. I'd go to the office and do my job there, and then I'd come home and I'd work in the yard until the sun went down, and I was physically exhausted, and then I'd drink myself to sleep. And I would do that pretty much every night. Getting out of that was probably the hardest part, because I had to be willing to not stay there. I think the whole journey of not just through grief, but through life, is a series of decisions. I couldn't get out of that until I decided I was ready to get out of it. Like when I quit smoking, I couldn't quit smoking until I decided I was going to quit smoking.
Yeah, but
Right.
But it sounds like part of you wanted to be there in that despair. What was it about the despair that made you not want to get out of it?
I didn't have to think. If that's all there is, that's all there is. But if I allow myself to open up to see more, then I have to be able to accept the anger. I've got to be able to accept the possibility that I might laugh. I got to accept the possibility that I'm going to walk into a grocery store and see an aisle of beer and start crying because that was the one that he used to drink. Right?
And so you talking about this idea of step one is accepting reality. I imagine it's a number of little steps towards accepting that. But one is this idea of despair and depression help to not think about that reality that is probably really hard to accept.
It is. For me, it was.
Yeah.
There's a term called widow brain, where you're really just numb to everything. It's your mind's way of trying to prevent you from going insane. But it's a constant state of that is kind of where that numbness of despair was. You know, when I'm talking about despair, I'm talking about a lack of hope. I'm not talking about gnashing teeth and ripping off my clothes, but it's just, there is no hope. Everything that I had dreamed about, everything I'd wanted, everything I believed in, my faith, everything was gone. And half of my heart was gone. Half of what I thought was my soul was gone. I was no longer me. I was now something else, and I did not have any way or any skills or any knowledge of how to not be that. Even though I went to a grief group frequently, it was still not enough to really pull me out, but I think it was probably enough to keep me from offing myself.
Yeah. And so you're described this journey of really accepting this new reality and how hard it is, because it's basically all your hopes, as you said, are just not there anymore. You're not you anymore. Is there any advice that you've heard that is just terrible advice to give to someone experiencing grief?
I've heard a couple of phrases. One that sounds trite, and even if it is true, it's not something that people want to hear immediately. It gets better. You'll learn to cope with it over time, and in that sense, it gets better. But when you're just now dealing with a loss, saying it gets better is no help.
What did you want to hear?
That's a good question. What would I want to hear? Don't let other people tell you how to grieve. Yeah, you do it on your time frame, in your way. There's no right or wrong way of grieving. If somebody tells you it's been 6 months, why aren't you over it yet? I have a couple of hand gestures for them. Right? So it's that kind of stuff. Don't let somebody box you into a time frame. Well, at 6 months, you should be doing this. Not at 1 year, you should be doing that. You do it when you're ready. My gauge for whether or not I am on a journey is whether or not I'm progressing every day. And that doesn't mean that I'm not going to take 2 steps back on some days, but I am progressing because I'm not at square one. If somebody feels that they're stuck at square one, that's when I suggest they seek professional help, because they could be dealing with, complicated grief syndrome. That's my measurement, is if I'm moving forward, then I'm moving forward, and I'm doing it at my own pace where I feel comfortable. I'm dealing with my emotions.
I imagine that's really relieving for people if they can give themselves grace and in their pace.
That's one of the messages I try to share, is on your own pace and at your own time.
The last thing that's going to help is comparing your journey to someone else's, and why am I not doing this fast enough or the right way when you've literally just lost someone you've loved.
That's part of the 13 pieces of advice that are in Life After Losses. It's don't compare your journey to somebody else's. I have a friend who remarried or started dating 6 weeks after his wife died. It took me 2 years. What does that say about our loves with our spouse? Not a thing.
Nothing.
It says more about my ability to move forward or process forward or his. We all go through things at a different time. Now, I know from speaking to him since then that he does feel like he may have jumped into it, but he's happy with where he is right now, and I'm happy with where I am right now. Another thing that kind of bothered me was he's in a better place. And I know that that's supposed to be meant to be comforting. And if you say that to somebody who's grieving, what they're hearing is, it wasn't good enough for them to be with me, because I must have been the bad place.
Ooh, so, wow. So if someone's saying to you, they're in a better place, what might be heard by someone is, the space that I'm holding here with them, with this person I love, is not good enough.
Right.
And so now they've gone, I've never thought of it that way.
I've had several conversations with other widows and widowers about that. And I know it's not meant to be a negative thing. It's meant to be compassionate and they're no longer suffering and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I get it. But when you say that to somebody who's grieving, some people might actually read it as that the better place is here with me. Because then we're both better.
Yeah. Jim, well, I just want to thank you for this perspective just on life and loss and love that you have such a unique perspective on. The last question I have for you before we close out here is really something around the LGBTQ identities and keeping your heart open after, the world doesn't always love you the way that you should be loved or accept you the way you should be accepted. And how do we keep our hearts open through that? And so not only have you dealt with, I'm sure, the stigmas of losing someone with HIV, losing 2 partners, how do you keep your heart open to connection?
Good question. Just, and I don't know how much time we have, but brief story is in between the Bobs, when I was dating, I did not disclose first Bob's diagnosis to somebody I was dating, and it was none of its business. I was not positive. I was, negative, and his prior diagnosis of somebody who's dead really wasn't the guy's business. Somebody in my circle mentioned it to him, and he got very upset because I didn't disclose it. That kind of stigma made it very difficult to talk to anybody else. Just because my husband passed away didn't mean that I was positive. And finding the second Bob, who took me with all the baggage and held space for me and let me hold space for Bob 1. was one of the things that drew me to him and made me fall in love, is that he respected that relationship didn't end. I didn't call it off. He didn't call it off. Somebody else called it off. And that love was always going to be there, and that he could not compete and did not need to compete with that love.
Yeah. So it sounds like really being with someone who is able to accept you for all of you, baggage included.
Yeah, whole trunk full now. Yeah. And so I spent nearly 10 years of not willing to allow myself to have a relationship with somebody else, because I did not want a third. Right? I didn't want a three-peat. That triple crown did not do me. That doesn't do me any good in that context. But at the same time, I'm not completely shut off from the idea, so I'm willing to entertain the idea. But it would really need to be somebody like Second Bob, who recognizes all, like you said, all that baggage, that history, and allows me to be me, faults and all.
Yeah, very important, I think, for any relationship. Well, so Jim, if anyone wants to stay in contact with you or look you up, how can they reach you?
Probably the easiest way would be on most of the socials, at lifeafterlosses.com, or at lifeafterlosses, or lifeafterlosses.com.
Okay, beautiful. Lifeafterlosses.com. And do you want to put your AOL screen name? Just kidding.
What was it? I don't even remember what it was. That's 1998, man.
Long time ago.
A little bit.
Thank you for joining. Appreciate you sharing your story, and looking forward to talking again.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care.
You too.
Thank you for listening to the Queer Conscious Podcast, where we explore how love feeds us, heals us, and gives us life. I'm your host and queer love coach, Nathan Serrato. But remember that the conversations that we're having here today are not a replacement for working with a licensed therapist, professional coach, or mental health practitioner. These conversations are for entertainment and education purposes only. But if you are dealing with some big challenges and you're thinking about seeking some professional support, it is one of the most empowering things that you can do for yourself. You can visit queerconscious.com for more information on how to do that. Now, if you love today's episodes and you want more episodes like this, I need your help. Please leave a 5-star rating and review. That's going to help me to bring you more high-quality content and interviews. So until then, take care of yourself, and don't forget to let love in.